Okay, so maybe I'm going to get started with a very quick introduction. I want to say a huge, huge thank you to James and Ethan for coming by and for giving us some information on how they built this amazing space. I know that the team at Hubs have found it super inspirational and just a really cool environment to explore. So I'm not going to take up any more time, but just a few things I wanted to mention. I am streaming this at the same time, so people who are not inside this room might hear things so no sharing private secrets. But also, if you do find that your computer is sort of slowing down or whatever, it can't handle being inside of this space, feel free to jump onto the Twitch stream because that should be a little bit more performant if you're on like a mobile phone or something.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, if you wanted to adjust any of the preferences in terms of sound, I don't know if you folks can hear anything still, but sometimes I find it changes depending on the device you're using. If you go to the drop-down menu in the upper left-hand corner and choose your preferences, you can adjust the media volume as well there. So without any further ado, I will introduce, here we go, James and Ethan. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, our pleasure. Hey,
Yeah, of
everyone.
course.
Um, I'm James. I'm the immersive tech lead at Paradowski Creative. Basically running a team focused on 3D interactive and specifically AR, VR kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I'm Ethan, and I am on James' team. My title is Immersive Technology Engineer, and I am technically currently the only other full-time member of that team. So it's just the two of us right now.
Yeah, small team. Well, growing though, if you know anybody, we're hiring for a 3D technical artist as well as another immersive developer position if you know of anybody looking. And that's remote friendly, and we're based out of St. Louis, Missouri. Our agent, we work for just kind of a marketing and ad agency that's in the past been very web and app and print based and is now moving more into the kind of the 3D immersive world led by our team, I think. And so this was a project that kind of came out. Uh, we had had a cool mixed reality game about to debut at our science center in St. Louis on March 12th. And then, of course, that's right when everything fell apart with COVID and all the lockdown went into place. So um, immediately, I think we were all just kind of asking how we should respond. And a lot of our creatives did what they do best, which is just start making art, creating things. And the internal effort there kind of evolved into a community art project where we asked for submissions from a lot of like artists and agencies we knew and trusted, and really just put out a broad public call and then the virtual gallery was kind of an outgrowth of that. Um, and yeah, I think that's probably a good high level overview of how this came to be. This is just the permanent home, the permanent installation for that project, which um, amazingly is maybe not the most top of mind, social thing going on in the world right now. But at the moment in time, I think this was a big like labor of love for Ethan and I and the whole creative team as well.
Yeah. I don't really have anything to add for that, but I think James covered that all. But yeah, it was definitely a very intense project to work on and
Mm-hmm.
very enjoyable to work on.
Awesome. So this is going to be like a community Q&A for folks. So if you do have any questions, we don't have anything set. So feel free to either ask it now, or if you don't want to unmute yourself, you can feel free to enter it in the chat. I'll keep track of things as they come up as well. So yeah, I just want to hand the mic over to the audience if anyone's got any questions. Otherwise, I've got lots. Okay, if no one stops me in the next couple seconds, I'm going to just start off by asking a question that I know I've been getting quite a bit from the community is just like, can you tell us a little bit more about what the process was like to build this? Like what tools did you use? And do you have any recommendations for folks who are building worlds like this?
The audio is clear if you go near them.
Sure. Yeah, I think our overall stack
I'm
was a
inside
lot of
this
like
dome and I can
develop.
hear them perfectly.
I can hear someone talk.
And yeah, if you're not
Oh,
answering the
it's
questions or
video,
asking
sorry,
anything,
yeah.
if you could please just mute, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so we mainly use Spoke and Hubs. Honestly, the Hubs cloud stack to kind of build out the space and kind of lay out the layout of the rooms and the theming of each room. The main actual 3D design tool, which Ethan's much better equipped to talk about, was Blender. So this whole project is an open source thing from top to bottom, pretty much.
I
From the
can hear it perfectly now.
Hubs cloud on down. So yeah, Ethan, if you want to talk about Blender a little more.
Yeah, so we used Blender for the construction of the space, kind of from start to finish, really. It started with just sort of a boxed out version of this that just blocked up the space that we could walk through. And that allowed us to kind of get a sense of scale, a sense of like how it should be laid out and where things would be placed. And then after that, we started to convert it to a more, I guess, a more like complete space that was all connected and started to have the rooms interwoven with each other. And then we started applying materials and textures to things. And then the biggest task of all is obviously the light baking, which is what kind of took the space to the next level. And that was also all done in Blender. It's a very, very tedious process because it requires converting a lot of materials and textures and then kind of paring those down to a lot of single textures. And I think total, this entire scene has like some 55 different textures in it. So it's not a small number. And then from Blender, we export to GLTF and we take it up to Spoke. And then Spoke goes directly to Hubs, and that's kind of the full round circle of the project.
Yeah. And so being able to kind of bring those Blender work in progress designs into Spoke and then into Hubs, and so quickly bring our entire team into here, we could really get the sense of how it would feel when you're in the room for everyone and get like our creative and designer's perspective as well. And that, as well as like at that time, we had the pen tool enabled and everything. So we could just drag and drop in, comps and our designers were drawing stuff on the wall, like move this painting over here, so that part was really cool too. Any Blender users in the crowd?
I have a little bit of decent amount of experience with it.
Hello?
I wish that I used Blender, but it's hard. I've started.
We've got there's a great Blender tutorial that you make a donut, like a frosted sprinkled donut. It's like the hello world of Blender basically, and we've got pretty much our entire company doing it now because everybody's so excited about like this 3D modeling and 3D creation process now. So
that's awesome.
It's cool to watch a bunch of like UI and graphic designers all of a sudden like pour into Blender and like be really getting good results fast. It's cool.
That's awesome. Does anyone else have any questions about how this space was built?
Hello, my name is Fabrizio. I've got a question regarding the UVs more specifically. So what was your workflow in creating the UVs and what were the resolutions of the textures and how did you combine all the objects between them?
Sure. So the way that this entire space is built is that currently each individual room is its own separate object. And within the room, I tried to keep everything as a single object just to save on performance, reduce the draw calls. So for example, this room here that we're in right now, aside from the posters themselves, only has a few materials and a few textures. I think about 3 or 4 in this room. And so the textures for the light baking process ranged from, I think I went down as small as 512 by 512 all the way up to our max, which was 2048 by 2048. I think this one probably has the most 2048 by 2048 textures because it is the biggest room. And as far as the UVs, before everything was baked on those materials, the UVs were unwrapped as you would expect, just to map textures on different surfaces. But then there was a second set of UVs that's used for baking, where you use the light map unwrap parameters so that it packs everything in as tightly as it can to maximize the UV space as well as it could. And then it simply bakes all the light from the standard UVs, the first set, to the light mapped UVs. And then that results in what you're seeing now.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So what's the difference again between the first set of UVs and the second one? Is the first one used in this room or just the second one?
So there's a first set of UVs that is initially applied to every object, and that's just when we're creating it. So for example, if you look at this wall over here, I don't want to move too far away so you can't hear me, but the wall that I'm facing right now is just unwrapped as a normal wall. So it would just be a flat UV surface straight across the board. So, but then for the light mapping, what I do is there's an option in Blender for light map unpack, and it will take your UVs and it will simply kind of unstitch them almost, and then put them back or pack them back in as tightly as possible into several different islands. And so what you're seeing is the light map UV. And the light map UV, while it is different, the UV itself is different than the original UV, the visual result is the same.
Okay, I understand. So you're just making use more of the UV space.
Right, yeah. We're just trying to avoid any wasted space in this if we can.
All right. Is the text on the same UV map, or is that on different layers?
So the text is also baked in. For walls that had text that needed high detail, I rendered those at a little bit higher resolution, and then I also made sure to split. I think this wall right here is split across two different textures, just because it needed to be high enough resolution that you could read all of the names.
Yeah, especially if you check out like the plaques next to a painting in one of the actual exhibit rooms. It's quite small if you actually get up to it. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, so the quality is really good in the text and compared to some posters. And what is the noise in the environment, in the texture, a design choice, or is it a compression result?
It's partially compression, partially due to the fact that we didn't have enough time to bake all of the light out as much as we wanted to. Like with environmental lighting, noise is very, very easily introduced. If you have like a single light source, like a single point light source, it's very easy to get rid of that noise because the calculations are much simpler. But since we have this giant skylight up above, it makes the overall scene noisier. So it's not a design choice per se, it's just sort of a byproduct of the baking process. But we essentially baked the lighting for as long as we could let it go within our timeline that we had.
Yeah, exactly. We should probably mention that we started the poster project in early March, but really we built this whole space in around 3 weeks. It was kind of a drop everything and get it out by, we had announced the date for the show to come out. Poster sales, I think, had already started, so there was a physical fabrication aspect of the whole project as well to contend with. Once that was up and kind of running on its own, then we turned our attention to this space. And about 3 weeks from from beginning to end. I guess there was some initial R&D on the Hubs Cloud side earlier in that process, but
Wow, 3 weeks, that's really amazing. Like, I'll do
yeah.
some shameless promotion from my part, because I've been working on an event. It's called Future Proof, and it was part of my final year degree. We were creating this event where students would showcase their posters to industry people, their
Hmm.
projects to industry people, and I worked on
Mhm.
that for almost 2 months,
Mhm.
but it was now and then.
Sure.
Yeah,
Our team,
oh, sorry, I just wanted to mention that I was so surprised when you folks shared this link to it because you'd done it so quickly and you also were very hands-off in terms of the involvement of the team. Like, we hadn't been involved in the process of building this at all. And so when we learned about it and got to explore it, we just thought it was the best. It was so fun.
Well,
Such a surprise.
I wouldn't say you were uninvolved. I think your team was critical to us getting this up and running at several points, even if you didn't realize it at the time. I would definitely attribute that. So,
Definitely, I second that.
yeah.
Someone has asked, can you talk about the vertical space creation and the use of ramps?
Yeah, I think there's different rooms throughout the space are kind of you'll find different vertical height for the ceiling, and it kind of is, each room is themed. For instance, the one to our right here is the home room, I think, and it's kind of reflecting on what it means to be at home, but also kind of be trapped at home right now. And so I think the geometry of each space, including like the vertical height and everything, was meant to carry off the theme of the room. Um, we didn't do too much I think there's one room that goes totally vertical, and that's in the very back, and there's kind of the hand, wireframe hand statue. Um, and then there's another ramp on the opposite of this wall to our left, that you can kind of walk back up this and kind of come back into the main entryway over here. I think that was kind of a nice like loop back in a way to see this same entryway lobby space from a different perspective. And yeah.
Yeah, the big staircase was interesting to make because we had to figure out something that would work, obviously at the scale, of the virtual character, while not at the same time not taking up too much space that would like cover up the posters and also provide like a good viewing angle and actually be walkable within Hub. So it was kind of a little bit of a juggling act, but thankfully it only took one or two iterations before we were able to get something that worked.
I guess I should say the rest of our team, that there was about a group of 6 people that focused on this, including Ethan and I on the tech side. Ethan's basically our lead technical artist on this project. I was pretty much web dev and admin backend side, as well as doing some of the UI customization that we did. And then we had another animator, technical artist, modeler, as well as, and then basically 3 designers working on this. So the designers kind of divvied up rooms, and yeah, I think that's probably worth mentioning, that it wasn't just us 2. It was we had some creative help as well.
So I'm just going to repeat this for the people that are watching via stream in the future. So someone asks, did you have any or do any Hubs Cloud customizations on the back end?
So I customized the Hubs client, which is the 3D Hubs app that we're in now, but not extensively, really just removing UI for the most part. We also made use of like some REST API and WebSocket routes that the Hubs backend exposes, but there really wasn't time to add I think some of our initial creative thoughts were, yeah, we wanted like custom interaction and custom event driven animation stuff. as well as we wanted to have buttons next to every painting to click out to the e-commerce link to buy the poster. So there was a few interactivity things that we couldn't quite get to in the time we had, but we were able to customize the client to a certain extent.
So there was just one person who was asking about how many attendees you had. Did you track any of the analytics or anything?
Yeah, we had over 1,200 over the first weekend unique visitors, and our average stay time was north of like 4 minutes, 30 seconds, approaching 5 minutes. So that was really cool to see. I think peak we had maybe 100 plus concurrent users the opening night, and they kind of swelled off over there. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Don't be shy.
One more about the compression. What compression techniques did you use on the texture, or did you compress them further after you baked them?
So that's that's actually an interesting topic because it's currently not in its ideal state. Right now, it is simply JPEG images, which is not really great for what they're being used for right now. And what we were trying to do was integrate basis textures, but that was unfortunately not something we could do in time because it would require modifying the Spoke client, and that was just something we didn't have time to do. So we just got it to a working point with compressed JPEGs. And down the road, we're still aiming to hopefully make some sort of breakthrough with the basis textures and be able to do something of this at this scale using basis. But for now, it's just JPEGs.
If people aren't familiar with basis, it's basically a way to have textures live on your GPU and not have to decode them off of it. So it allows for like crazy compression of graphics and textures, like 80% compression almost versus uncompressed ping. And it's new. It was made by this company called Binomial, but it's now been open sourced by Google. And yeah, I'm like midway through a PR for Spoke to try to get Spoke to accept Hubs textures. Because actually, if you drop a basis encoded GLB into this space, into a Hubs room, it actually will load and it will be totally compressed. But Spoke is the piece of the stack that doesn't have that, so we couldn't drop the entire space into an empty room, I guess, if that makes sense.
All right, thank you. Did you have any target in the size of the JPEGs? Because, for example, when I created some models for Hubs, I was looking to keep the size of the texture below 1 megabyte.
Yeah, so I believe all of our textures are individually below a megabyte. I think most of them by a significant amount. I think around the largest texture in here is probably sitting at around 400 kilobytes. But because there's so many, it still adds up a lot. So, which is just another reason why we would want to use something that's even more compressed.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's like the compressed file size on your disk. When you actually load it into computer memory, it gets expanded way beyond that.
Right.
As soon as that's the true benefit of basis textures. Basis doesn't have to get uncompressed in order to be loaded into memory.
Right. The loaded uncompressed file size of a basis texture in virtual memory or video memory is going to be much smaller than an image file, which is what a JPEG is. Basis is constituted as a texture file, I believe. So it is just much more performant on the GPU. Because I think a JPEG at like a 2048 by 2048 JPEG, once uncompressed and living on your GPU, it's going to be at least 10 megabytes, I believe.
Interesting. Okay, thank you very much.
So I'll just read this out loud. They may have said this already earlier, but what was the most difficult aspect of the technical build, and how long did it take to complete the Blender meshes?
So completing the actual space, that was sort of a multi-part process. The reason being was someone else actually made the main mesh that you see here, so the actual structure of the rooms, and then he handed it off to me, and then I took it and I essentially remeshed it a little bit so that it would be a little bit more optimized, and made sure everything was lining up correctly, and made sure that it had UVs that worked for what we wanted, and that didn't take too terribly long. I'd say it took maybe around a day's worth of work. But then there was the actual placement of everything, so all of the smaller objects that you see throughout the space, and that took a few days to sort of get everything together, make sure that it was all textured correctly, put it into the file, et cetera, because it was doing this room by room essentially, and people were also asking for changes at the same time. And then the hardest part, I believe, was probably getting all the materials set up correctly for every single object, especially since some of the smaller objects that you'll see around the space are things pulled from like Turbo Squid or Sketchfab, just wherever we could find a fitting object. And so they're all made by different people and constructed kind of differently. And that means the materials are also not going to be the same. So I had to sort of unify those, and then get them ready for baking. And then once they were all baked, then I had to create a new material essentially for every single object and then apply the baked version of it. So that was probably the most laborious process of all of this.
And we were designing and making changes up until the day before launch. So we also had to allot enough time to actually do all that baking, which on like a single GPU would have been days. So what we actually ended up doing was spin up like basically an AWS based supercomputer with 8 V100 GPUs in it. Best GPU you can get, and we got 8 of them. So it's, even though it's like cranking through this space at a rate we could never do locally, it still took hours and hours to like bake through everything. So that was kind of an intense last minute aspect as well.
Yeah, it was very interesting because we had to, in order to get the files onto this computer, essentially you have to take a 500 megabyte Blender file and upload it to Google Drive and then download it to the computer and then do that back and forth with different versions several times within a day. It's a very interesting process.
Yeah, like those AWS servers are set up to just be like Linux boxes that you SSH into on the command line. And we went through the trouble of actually installing a high definition desktop client, Linux desktop client on this thing so that we could then install desktop Blender so that Ethan could actually go through and like set all that material stuff up remote. Yeah, that was awesome. That was fun.
And for anyone curious, thankfully, Blender kind of just works out of the box perfectly with Linux. It's actually amazing,
Yeah,
even with
that
all
was
the
awesome.
GPUs and stuff.
That was more expensive than I thought it was going to be.
And is
Yes,
it all
yeah, that
done
was
on
on
an
EC2.
EC2 server? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, an EC2 server. They call them. Gosh, what is it's some letter code, but P4. Yeah, EC2 P4 server. You can get it with different kinds of NVIDIA GPUs and NVIDIA drivers. It took me like a day to set it. The setup was a bit difficult to follow at first, but I did it once, and I only allotted 2 of those GPUs. And I was like, oh, that's not good enough. So then I did it again, and it took like half the time, and I got 4. And then I did it a third time and got all 8. And that only took like 15 minutes once I knew the process. As far as the cost, gosh, the one with 8 V100 GPUs, I think that's like $20 an hour or something like that. So not super cheap, but if you're in crunch time and have a creative project that has to get out, you know. I'll read this one.
So-
Did we have situations when someone wanted to visit the space but had issues with entering and navigation? If so, what was the solution on this? Yeah, we had a couple issues on that, both technical and like UX stuff. For one, this space will not run on an iPhone. It basically just crashes an iPhone. And we were hoping to fix that like right up until launch, but it ultimately didn't get it working. So we just had to, like, if you click our landing page entry link from an iPhone, it just says to try on another device. But aside from that, there's, you know, a lot of UX stuff as far as a lot of people, our clients, for our agency clients, for instance, and our colleagues aren't, you know, very fluent in 3D interface, or, you know, what I would call this is a first-person controller, a first-person game or something. If you don't have a gaming background and you haven't done a lot of 3D work, like controllers like this, it's not obvious how to like move, you know, wiggle around and stuff. So we relied on the Hub's default tour, honestly, and our biggest UI UX customization was really just simplifying. I think if you look at the UI options you have as guests in this room now, it's somewhat simpler than what you would see on a default Hubs room. Just so we didn't want to confuse people. Essentially, the main objective of this space is to kind of like gather together with people and wander around and view the work. You know, put the focus on the work. So that's just disabling the pen, disabling the camera, disabling screen share, disabling drag and drop of documents and stuff. Most of that is permissions based. The Hubs team has, you know, in the preferences menu, allowed moderators to enable and disable features. Some of that was just like light CSS hacks that I, you know, show or hide something on the Hubs client side, and a little bit. I think I messed with some of the logic for stuff, but not much.
Yeah, and then I say the one final thing that we did was we also had people from our company kind of positioned in every room to help people out if they didn't know what was going on. And that was just on the opening night. So just when we first opened it up to the public, but that proved to be fairly successful in making sure that people kind of understood the space a little bit better.
Good call. Yeah, good point. And I would also just say the design of the space factored into how people approach it. Like you spawn on the other side of this video dome, and I think you're immediately drawn to that. You're immediately drawn to kind of the layout, the museum layout we have over on the wall over here. And it's a bit of a circuit, a bit of a loop that we put in here, but yeah, I think that was another way we kind of tried to smooth out UX for folks.
I just wanted to add too that we've kind of touched base with your team and my team as well at the same time to kind of go over some of the things that you wish had been a little bit easier surface inside of the Hubs Cloud Admin panel as well. We have a few other questions that sort of like we've lost track of at this moment, so I hope that I interpret them right because I just sort of made some notes to myself. What did you end up using to host this? Did you go with the personal or enterprise version of Hubs? I think was the first one.
This is just the personal one. I think the server we're all on right now is the default suggested one. I forget the little letter codes, but for the opening night, I upgraded to, yeah, exactly, T3 Medium. For the opening night, I upgraded to the largest one I could for the personal stack without I think there was a limit for like a stack update. You couldn't go beyond this number of this certain machine or something. But yeah, I had heard through the Hub's Discord grapevine that the one we ran for opening night could handle 1,000 concurrent users, and yeah, we never approached that. So.
And then there was another question in chat. I'm just pulling it up right now. I took a screenshot. How long have you guys been working with Blender, and how does Paradowski, I don't actually know how to pronounce the company name correctly. Paradowski?
Paradowski.
Paradowski. Have any other Blender WebGL products in the work?
Yeah, certainly. We have a ton of, we're really focused on kind of 3D immersive web. Ever since putting this space out, we've had a ton of client interest. I think a lot of people have never seen anything like this through their web browser. So that was really cool response to get. So yeah, we'd already had stuff in the works, and since this project came out, it's kind of engendered a lot of new interest. But man, I've been working with Blender for 6 months, but Ethan here is an old pro, so if you want to talk about that a bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, so we don't have a ton of Blender specific experience at the company, although we do have several other people who are familiar with 3D programs, so like Cinema 4D. I've personally been using Blender, I want to say since around 2010 or 2011, and we also have at least one other person at Paradowski who has been using it for several years now as well. As for like the WebGL 3D projects that we have had, yeah, we have several. We have several that we're kind of working on right now. We did one in the past that was an AR app that used 3D models and GLTF and animations and all that, even with like a custom shader that was done at like a trade show. I guess we've had some like just proof of concept stuff that we've done in the past. And we're definitely hoping to do a lot more in the future for sure.
As well as some research applications for Washington University psychology team. We're doing basically building some 3D maze applications for them. And like I said, a lot of client interest in this stuff has been stoked too. So it's cool to see.
Someone asked, is the final size approximately 40 megabytes for this environment?
I can look that up for you right now since I'm on the computer that I made it on. So give me just 1 second. You move on to another question.
That sounds right. That's about right.
Please don't be shy. If you've got questions, feel free to write them in the chat box or unmute and ask them.
Yeah. And
that is almost exact. It says it's 40,995 kilobytes. So yes, it is almost exactly 40 megabytes.
I wonder if they eyeballed that. That's impressive. Wow. Just looking around the space, I'd say this is about 40 megabytes.
Yeah, I think when it's actually loaded into Spoke, it does end up being a little bit bigger because things sort of get unpacked, but its compressed size is 40 megs.
And so folks know, we went way over the suggested size of geometry and texture memory for this space. Like I said, it struggles a bit on mobile. Mainly a desktop and VR experience for us, but I think that's a choice we made. So the other option, I suppose, would have been to just split this up into different spoke scenes and made individual rooms that link to each other. I think for our purposes, though, it makes more sense and makes more of an impact as one, museum scale environment, more so than I think the hard reload between rooms was if it could have been a single page app type of quick change to a room, that might have been something we would have considered, but the hard reload is a bit heavy. So yeah, that was our thinking.
And I know that like I came in on the quest. Some people have mentioned in the chat that they had a bit of trouble in the quest, but I was just like amazed that I could get in and like I was able to walk around and there wasn't really any lag at all for me. And given the size of this environment, I was super, super excited about that. There was also a question about the like what is next for hubs and when will the trigger thing be built? So thank you for reminding me, Queenie. I was just going to get to that. So I'm not sure about the event trigger, but we are doing our roadmap planning in the next like week or two for the next things that we're looking into, and we've had that request from a few folks. It's definitely something our team wants to see built. If you do want specifics on when we're going to be prioritizing that, if you are in our Discord community, you can feel free to like ask in the dev channel or so. They might be able to, the dev team might be able to give you a bit more information because I'm afraid I don't know exactly where that stands in terms of our priority. But it's something that we definitely really want to get built. And I think Nikita, who's in the room also, we were chatting about this just the other day as well.
Yeah, that would be an amazing feature.
Yeah.
Also, there have been since this came out, there have been some features released in hubs that would make experiences like this better. So we've released support for actual separate UVs for light maps. So that would
really?
That would actually mean that you could bake the light maps into a separate texture and keep the original UVs you had used, rather than having to bake it all out into a diffuse texture.
That's awesome.
Blender exporter now too, so you can just
I did not know that.
set that all up in Blender. So.
Dom, I didn't know that you and Robin were in the room at the moment. Is there anything else exciting that's coming up with hubs that you're looking forward to launching in the near future?
Oh boy. Well, I mean, like I said, I recently worked on some stuff for the Blender add-on, so check that out. Other stuff coming up. Like you said, we're doing roadmap planning pretty soon, so we're going to figure out kind of what priorities to focus on. But no, I don't. Off the top of my head, I don't have anything. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a little unclear because there's a lot of things that we're talking about adding and that we'd love to see added in the near future. But yeah, we just don't know exactly how we're going to be prioritizing it because there's a lot of really great ideas.
Yeah,
but if you are in our community and want to weigh in about things that you think would be important to add, now would be a good time to be mentioning it in our Discord, so it's on our radar when we go into the planning sessions in a few weeks. Anyone else have any questions? Oh, I've got one coming in from Twitch. In terms of speed, did you load models asynchronously, like the paintings and the furniture?
No, it's all up front, essentially. Same spoke entry process that you would get with any space. Yeah.
And
yes,
all the photos are within the Blender file, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So all the posters themselves are contained within the Blender file. Although they were not baked, the lighting on those are not baked. They're just the default, and we just matched the environment lighting to sort of fake, making them look like they are sitting in the scene properly. And I think by default, most of the posters are sitting around six posters per texture, I want to say. So there's 154 posters total, and most of them are divided into groups of 6 on a single texture, just for performance reasons.
Can I ask a question? I was taking notes last time we chatted, and I remember someone mentioning something about this, and so I wanted to confirm. So like the image file, and then there's like the name of the artist beside it as well too. Like, how did you handle that data?
Right. So the first step in that was actually the most tiresome, which was essentially opening up Illustrator or Photoshop, I don't remember which, and basically laying all of the posters and all of the image plaques out into grids, essentially. And not just randomly, but they all had to be grouped so that I could keep track of them later on. So I tried to group them by room as closely as possible. And so the plaques, I believe, are on grids of 6x6, and the posters are on grids of 2x3, which both of those worked out to be perfect squares just due to the nature of the uh, image aspect ratios. And then those were brought in, and essentially I just put the entire texture on a plane, and then I just cut along the seams. It's basically like printing out multiple pictures on a single piece of paper and then cutting them apart. That's basically how that worked.
Another thing that I found really interesting when I heard you folks kind of showing us around the space was about how you added the sounds into the room. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think we would have liked to have done a little more of that if we had time. Like when you first come in, the Duke Ellington song called "Never Stop Remembering Bill," old jazz trio number. For me, it just kind of struck the right somber but contemplative but kind of hopeful notes. And then I think there's also like in the diner scene, which is the room I put together in Blender. There's a 50s a 50s mix or something. I wanted to actually put that together myself, but our designer Terry did ultimately. I think there's like Lollipop. I don't know what that song's actually called. Lollipop, Lollipop, and Little Richard's in there. Evoking the room, and music's just such a powerful way to reach people, and to kind of evoke the right emotion that you want for the theme of the room and for the theme of the whole space, really. So. And that's just the way, the way we accomplish that is just literally the drag and drop an MP3 into Hubs or into Spoke. And then you can, what we did was just put it slightly outside the wall so you can hear it. Obviously the wall's not going to block the sound or anything. So you don't actually see the little media tile thing you usually would, but you can still obviously get the audio effect.
Yeah, and then another thing that we had to do was play with the fall off settings just a bit, just to make sure that you weren't hearing music outside of its intended range. The video sphere was especially important for that, just to make sure you only really heard the video while you're inside the sphere.
Looks like Alex is asking if we did anything special for people to climb stairs, or the environment handle the ability to climb. I think it's just a ramp. Instead of actually using the stair geometry. It's just a smooth ramp up the steps. Is that correct, Ethan?
No, it actually is just using the stair geometry. So if you ever use Spoke, there is a floor plan generator, and there's a bunch of properties on there that sort of dictate how the mesh for the floor plan is generated. And there's a certain level, essentially, that it will skip over in geometry that will work as a ramp, essentially. And the stairs are just at the right size where it sees that as a ramp surface and not disconnected ones. No, yeah, all I did was I brought this mesh into like the entire scene into Spoke, and then I hit generate floor plan, and it worked. Now, I will say if you do have like some weirder geometry and it doesn't seem to work with the floor plan, a trick that I did come up with as sort of a backup plan for that is you can essentially copy paste just the floor part of your design and then make tweaks to it and then import that as well into Spoke and then turn off everything and just generate the floor based on that. And then you can hide that or delete it. And you'll still have the floor plan that's based on just that simpler mesh, but you will also have the original space that you want as well. But we did not need to do that for this space.
Right, that's what I thought you did.
That's what I said I was going to do, and then I ended up not needing to when I tried it. So.
What is the baking process like in Blender? Because I'm using Cinema 4D at the moment, and it allows you to choose the different channels, like the color, the luminance, the reflectance, the shadows. Did you have to play around with those, or was it automatic?
So it does give you all of those options with the baking settings. However, since we were just baking the direct environmental lighting, essentially, I just went with the full bake. So essentially this, if I were to render this in Blender, outside of, reflections and things, it would look essentially the same, albeit at a much higher resolution if it was rendered. So that was fairly painless. I just essentially left it on the default settings there. The process, though, requires you to, it's interesting. So you basically have to have an unconnected texture node in your material, and it will look for that unconnected texture node, and it will bake your texture to that. So if you're not careful, if you have a texture that you don't want overwritten in that texture node, and you hit bake, it will overwrite it. So you have to be very careful. And I'm assuming at some point down the road, they're going to streamline that process a little bit more. But for now, that's kind of how baking works. So it's simultaneously good and could use a little bit of work in Blender.
Yeah, Jim, actually, our artist, actually did a series of tutorials on how to do light baking in Blender.
Awesome.
And they're pretty easy to follow, even if you haven't really used Blender much before.
I feel like I'm seeing more hub spaces just come across my Twitter feed that do have that more, natural looking light baking and stuff.
Yep.
So it's cool to see that trend, increase for sure. Video file just spoke, right?
Yeah, I believe that all of the media files, I believe, are just placed into Spoke directly, and then they're played through there. So whatever server that's hosted on, I assume that's where they're coming from. Now, I did not personally assemble everything in Spoke. That was someone else, but we were relaying back and forth quite regularly. So that is my understanding, is that it was all just uploaded directly.
No, we didn't charge for this. We just did this as an internal project for our creative agency, Paradowski. You can see that at paradowski.com. And yeah, again, I kind of said this at the top of the hour, but this was really just a organic outgrowth of kind of what happens when all of a sudden 40 artists and designers are and developers are all of a sudden trapped in their homes and experiencing that kind of global moment with everyone, and reflecting on that. And yeah, so this came out of that, and no, didn't charge anything, and we sold. You can the orders are closed now, but we sold physical copies of all the posters on display here too on the apartposters.com website, and I think we ended up grossing $15,000 in poster sales that was donated to the World Health Organization pandemic relief fund, basically. Yeah, Alex is commenting that it would be nice if we could create hyperlinks from the posters to, the website, which was definitely one of our goals. But it was just, I think it would have been possible. We figured it out, but it was just, it was going to be such a content entry bottleneck, and we're just running up against our launch date. So ultimately, we couldn't do that, unfortunately. But that would be cool.
Yeah, just like Rainwolf was saying, some people cheat by putting links right behind the wall, and if you do it close enough, you can sort of get the open link thing that comes in front of the wall, and the actual screenshot shows up behind it. I just wanted to be mindful of the time. Jan is asking if you're working on any more Hubs rooms, but I just wanted to say that the hour is almost up, so I just wanted to let people know that I thank them for coming, and I just want to thank Ethan and James once again for their time. But I will pass the mic back over to